A poor village boy pulls a woman out of a flash flood. He never knew she was a billionaire who never forgot him. The rain came hard, like it had a score to settle. In the small, forgotten village nestled deep in the southern wetlands of Louisiana, the sky cracked open without warning. The tropical storm had been tracking farther east, or so the weather reports claimed. But it veered off course like it had a mind of its own. Within an hour, the bayou overflowed. Narrow dirt roads disappeared, and the sky turned the color of rusted tin. Elliot Granger had just finished patching a neighbor's roof when he heard it. A scream, sharp, desperate, carried by the wind like a knife through fog. "Help! I can't swim!" He froze. The rain pummeled his shoulders. Mud clung to his boots. But his legs were already moving before his brain caught up. He sprinted down the sloping road that curved toward the old wooden bridge that cut across the lower marsh. The water was already licking at the posts. Through sheets of rain and panic, he saw it. A black SUV, half submerged, wedged sideways against the bridge's edge, its headlights still flickering beneath the rising water. Inside, a woman was pounding her fists against the glass. Elliot tore off his soaked jacket and jumped onto the railing, then down onto the hood of the car. The current rocked the vehicle like a toy. He grabbed the crowbar tied to his tool belt and smashed the passenger window in 3 violent swings. Glass exploded outward into the dark water. Her scream was muffled. She was gasping, crying. Please, I can't breathe." He reached in and yanked at her seatbelt, cutting it with a pocket knife. "I've got you," he said, trying to keep her eyes on him. "Look at me, you're coming with me." She was soaked, trembling, nearly incoherent. "I don't know how to." "Don't worry about swimming. Just hold on." He gripped her arm, pulled her through the window as the SUV groaned beneath them. The back tires lifted, the car was about to go under. "Now!" he shouted, slinging her arm around his shoulder. "We're moving now." The current hit them hard. Elliot kicked, fought the pull of the floodwater. Debris floated past, branches, plastic bottles, a child's tricycle. The woman clung to him like breath. She coughed violently, sputtering. "Stay with me," he yelled over the roar. "You go, I go." "I'm not letting go." Her fingers gripped tighter. It took everything he had to pull her sideways along the edge of the current until they reached the overgrown ruins of an old tool shed, mostly forgotten, half collapsed against the high bank. He dragged her inside, using a rusted wheelbarrow to block the door as the water continued to creep in. They collapsed onto the wooden floor, both of them gasping. Water lapped at their calves. Elliot pulled a tarp from the corner and wrapped it around her shivering body. The woman's eyes fluttered, barely able to focus. Where are we?" "Somewhere dry enough," he said, crouching beside her. "That's all that matters." He could not see her face clearly in the darkness, just the outline of her jaw, the way her chest rose and fell too quickly. He pressed a hand to her forehead. She was burning up. Shock was setting in. He reached into his backpack, pulled out an emergency blanket, a granola bar, and a flask of water. "Here, eat, drink something." She tried to sit up, but her body sagged. Elliot steadied her. "No hero moves tonight, all right? We're not dying in a damn tool shed." She chuckled weakly. "That's reassuring." Thunder rumbled overhead. Rain battered the tin roof like fists. Water was up to their knees now, but the walls were holding. "You got a name?" he asked, just to keep her awake. She hesitated. "L. L," he repeated. "All right, I'm Elliot." She gave a faint nod. "Thank you, Elliot." The water was cold, his legs were numb, but he did not care. He sat beside her, gripping her wrist gently, checking her pulse, keeping her awake with stories about the village, about his grandma who raised him, about how he once got chased by a goose named Walter. She laughed, actually laughed, and somewhere, between the flood and the fear, in that half-drowned shed, Elliot forgot about the storm. She drifted into sleep near dawn, her hand still holding his. He did not let go. The rain slowed with the coming dawn, but the floodwater had not yet receded. Gray light spilled through the warped wood of the tool shed, revealing the remnants of a night that felt like it had stretched a lifetime. Elliot hadn't slept. Ellie, or whatever her real name was, lay wrapped in the emergency blanket, her breathing even now, her forehead cooler than it had been hours earlier. Her soaked hair clung to her cheek. Her hands, once trembling, now rested peacefully in her lap. He had kept the fire going all night with dry bark he found stacked in an overturned barrel, and split the last of his granola bar between them, insisting she eat even when she protested. She was alert enough now, calmer, but there was something else in her, something guarded. When she opened her eyes and caught him watching her, she didn't flinch. She just gave him the faintest smile. "I need to leave as soon as possible," she said quietly, her voice still rasped from the night before. Elliot nodded. "Of course. Roads are still out, but rescue boats have been working the lower marsh since sunrise. I've got a friend with a ham radio. I'll get someone here." She pushed herself to sit upright, wincing slightly. "It's not that I want to leave. I have to." He could have asked. Who was she? Why had she been driving through a dead-end bridge in a luxury SUV during a tropical storm? Why was she alone? Why did she seem like she was running from something? But Elliot had grown up around silence, around people who held their pain quietly like it might bite if let out. He understood too well the value of not pressing, so he said nothing. Instead, he knelt beside her and gently rolled up her pant leg. The cut along her calf had clotted, but it was angry and red. He cleaned it with bottled water, careful, precise, and wrapped it in gauze from his first aid kit. She watched him in silence. "You do this a lot?" she asked softly. He shrugged. "Growing up out here, you learn how to fix a lot of things, people included." She smiled again, small but genuine. By late morning, a rescue boat finally arrived. 2 men in orange vests guided it toward the half-flooded tool shed, calling out as they approached. Elliot stood and waved them down. When they helped her into the boat, she paused at the edge of the dock. She turned back to him. "You saved my life." Elliot opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He only nodded. She stepped closer, reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. She placed it into his palm. It was a silver token. Smooth, round, etched with a symbol he didn't recognize. "That makes you unforgettable," she whispered. And then she was gone. The boat pulled away. Elliot stood there, the token in one hand, the cold breeze brushing through his damp. He didn't even know her real name. She never looked back. And somehow, that hurt more than he thought it would. 2 years passed. The village dried out, the roads were rebuilt, and the tool shed where Elliot had once held a stranger through a flood turned into little more than a story whispered by the older folks who remembered that night. But for Elliot Granger, it never faded. He still lived in the same house at the edge of the marshlands, where Spanish moss hung low like lazy fingers and the cicadas hummed louder than silence. His grandmother, now mostly bedridden after her 3rd stroke, depended on him for everything: bathing, feeding, companionship. He worked part-time fixing irrigation pumps and water heaters for the neighbors, making just enough to pay for medicine and groceries. He did not talk about the night he saved a woman from drowning. Not because it hurt, but because no one would have believed how real it had felt, how much one night with a stranger could plant itself inside him like a seed that never stopped growing. Then, one Monday morning, the village library reopened after a quiet renovation. The structure had been there for decades, nothing fancy, just a single-story room with warped shelves and the smell of mildew and paper. But something had changed. There were new tables, fresh paint, air conditioning that actually worked, and a small sign at the entrance: "This library is made possible by a generous grant from the Lavinia West Foundation." Elliot barely registered the name. He had come to return a water pump manual. But before he could leave, Miss Marla, the librarian who'd known him since he was in diapers, called out to him, "Elliot, wait! You have to see this." She led him to a small display in the children's section. 5 new books sat on easels, bright and crisp. But it was the one in the center that made Elliot stop cold. The Boy and the River. The cover was hand-painted, almost dreamlike. A boy stood in waist-deep water, holding a torch above his head as storm clouds gathered behind him. A woman, half submerged, reached for his hand. His hand. Elliot stared at the illustration. The boy wasn't just a boy. It was him. Messy brown hair, the crooked scar above his brow, the homemade necklace he'd worn since age 10, the same exhausted eyes. It was him, but on a page, beneath a title turned into fiction. His fingers traced the cover, then slowly opened to the first page. The dedication read, "To the one who saved me. You never asked my name, but you gave me yours. I never forgot. L.W." Elliot sat down without realizing it. He flipped through the story. It was written in simple language, meant for children, but the weight behind the words was unmistakable. It told the tale of a woman who drove too far, too fast, into a storm. A boy with calloused hands who pulled her from a river, who kept her alive in the dark, who never asked who she was, only made sure she survived. And in the final pages, the woman tried to find him. She searched towns and cities, asked for names, wrote about him in her journals, painted him from memory, but she never found him until she told the story and gave it to the world. Elliot closed the book. He sat in the library for almost an hour, unmoving, his mind playing every image from that night like it had just happened. Lavinia West. He had never heard the name before, but somehow he knew. He didn't understand the how or why, but the way she looked at him that night, the way her voice shook when she said, "You saved my life," the way she placed that silver token in his hand, all of it came back. He reached into his wallet and pulled out the token. He still carried it. Smooth, round, etched with a wave and a star. Now, finally, it meant something more than memory. It meant connection. He stood up, the book still in hand, and asked Miss Marla, "Do you know who Lavinia West is?" She smiled, eyes twinkling. "Honey, she's a billionaire, owns some big tech company up north. But people say she's different, doesn't chase headlines, real quiet, but always helping someone." Elliot nodded slowly. He walked out of the library that day with the book pressed to his chest, the token warm in his hand, and the name Lavinia West echoing in his chest like the first sound of thunder before the rain returns. The rain had been falling since dawn, a steady, gray curtain that made the world feel like it had folded into itself. Elliot stood beneath the rusted awning of the old gas station, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had long given up the idea of cleanliness. He had just finished patching the carburetor on a pickup that belonged to one of the fishing families upriver. It was an ordinary day, till it was not. The hum of an approaching engine cut through the soft patter of rain. Not a local engine, this one was smooth, expensive. Elliot turned his head. A sleek black SUV pulled into the gravel lot, tires crunching to a stop. Its windows were tinted, spotless even in the downpour. A moment passed and then the driver's door opened. She stepped out slowly, her heels clicking on wet stone. She wore a long coat, rain-spotted, and beneath it a dark green blouse tucked into charcoal slacks. Her umbrella stayed closed at her side. She did not seem to care about the rain. Her hair, longer than he remembered, was pulled into a loose braid. Her face, more refined now, held a calm kind of urgency. She looked at him as if she had seen him yesterday, and then, in the quiet space between two heartbeats, she said it. "It's really you." Elliot didn't move. The rag in his hands dropped to the concrete. "Elle?" he said, barely above a whisper. A soft smile crossed her lips. "Not exactly. My full name is Lavinia West." Elliot blinked. The name landed differently now, no longer just words on a book cover. She was no longer the half-drowned stranger in the dark. She was Lavinia West, billionaire tech philanthropist, the woman whose name sat on library plaques and disaster relief clinics, the face behind the book that still sat under his pillow. And she had come back. "I didn't think you'd remember me," she said gently. "How could I not?" he said, voice low. They stood in the rain for a long moment. It was Elliot who finally gestured toward the covered bench just inside the service station. They sat, not quite facing each other. "I wasn't sure I'd find you," Lavinia said. "I had no name, no number. Only your face and a few hours of memory that took me months to piece together after everything." Elliot watched her carefully. "Why now?" She inhaled slowly. "Because I need your help. And because I never forgot you." He looked away. The rain danced on the pavement. "I'm launching a new project," she continued. "A series of community-led resilience hubs in flood-prone regions. Education, supplies, tech infrastructure, shelter, all built with the people, not just for them." She paused. "I want you to help lead the one here, and then come to the city, New Orleans, to start. You'll be on the design team. You know more about survival here than any expert I could pay." Elliot shook his head. I'm not an expert. I fix pumps and change oil. That's what I do." "You saved my life, Elliot. You kept me alive with a tarp and a granola bar. I've read reports from PhDs that taught me less than you did in a single night." His jaw clenched. "I belong here. This place, these people, they're my life." "I'm not asking you to leave them," she said softly. "I'm asking you to build something that makes sure they're not forgotten." He looked at her then, really looked. There was fire in her eyes. Not the polished gleam of cameras and PR shoots, but real, trembling urgency. Passion mixed with fear, like she was asking not just for his help, but for something more. "I thought you left," he said. "That night after they pulled you out, I waited. I looked for a name, anything. You just vanished." Lavinia's shoulders dropped. "I woke up in a hospital 2 days later. Concussion. They said I almost drowned. I remembered the water, your voice, your hands, but not much else. I didn't even know where I'd been rescued from. It took me months to trace the storm path and figure out where I might have ended up." She looked down at her hands. "And when I did, I was afraid." "Of what?" "That you wouldn't be who I remembered. Or worse, that you were, and I didn't deserve to find you." Elliot felt something stir in his chest, a knot that had been there since the day she left. It loosened, just a little. "I read your book," he said. Lavinia smiled, almost shy. "It was the only way I knew how to find you." A beat of silence passed. Then Elliot said, "You're not what I expected, Lavinia West." She turned to him, her eyes soft. "Neither were you." Another gust of wind swept across the lot, and her coat fluttered slightly. "I'll think about your offer," he said at last. "But I won't make promises." She stood. "I don't want promises." Then she hesitated, reached into her coat pocket, and pulled out something small, a silver token. "The same one." "I found another one," she said. "But the first one, the one I gave you, that was always meant for you." He looked at it, then looked at her. And for the first time in 2 years, Elliot wasn't sure where he belonged anymore. But he knew one thing. He had been seen. And something inside him, a quiet ache, began to stir back to life. Elliot never thought the city would feel so cold. Not the weather. New Orleans was still thick with humidity and rain. But the glass and steel, the echo of elevators, the polished silence of executive offices. He had come because Lavinia asked. He stayed because he believed in her. For weeks, he worked alongside her team on a flood recovery initiative meant to support vulnerable communities. His knowledge of land, weather, and rural life proved invaluable. He saw purpose in it, felt part of something bigger, until he saw the file. It was late. Most of the staff had gone home. Elliot stayed behind, reviewing budget reports for the community centers they planned to build. A misfiled document slid from a folder, stamped with the Lavinia West Foundation seal. Project New Eleanora, Flood Control Dam Status. Completed Incident Report, Structural Failure During Storm. Casualties, 3. Displaced Families, 42. Reason, Substandard Construction. Elliot froze. He knew that village. He had walked through its muddy remains after the flood last year. He had helped carry a child through waist-deep water there, And now he saw Lavinia's name at the top of a document tied to the disaster. His hands trembled. The next morning he walked into Lavinia's office, the file clenched tightly in his hand. "I need to know if this is real," he said. She looked up from her laptop, calm at first, until her eyes met the paper. She read it, scanned the damage report, and went completely still. I've never seen this," she whispered. "This wasn't run through my review." Elliot stared at her. "It has your foundation's stamp." "I know, but this wasn't me." Later that day, she returned to him with a grim expression. She had dug through internal files. The project had been greenlit and fast-tracked by the Foundation's executive director, her former partner David Holt. He had bypassed multiple checks and forged compliance reports. Lavinia had been kept in the dark. She sat down, visibly shaken. "I trusted him," she said. Elliot didn't speak for a long moment. When he finally did, his voice was low and tight. "If you didn't know, then you didn't care." Her eyes snapped to his. "Don't you dare say that. You funded a dam that killed people, Lavinia. I didn't know." "That's the problem," he said. "People died, and your name was there. You say you care, but where were you?" "I've spent my life trying to make things right," she cried. "I built this foundation from scratch, fought tooth and nail against everything that told me I wasn't enough. Don't you dare question my heart." Elliot shook his head, pain flaring behind his eyes. "You can matter without building a tower, Lavinia. You just had to stay. And you didn't." That broke her. She stepped back, as if his words had struck her physically. Neither of them said another word. That night, Elliot packed his bag. He left the apartment she had set up for him, left the project, the offices, the unfinished community blueprints. On the kitchen table he left a note, scrawled in pencil, "I can't build anything with someone I no longer trust. I'm sorry." He took a cab to the train station. Rain splattered the windows as the city faded into gray behind him. And Lavinia stood in the hallway of her empty apartment, holding the note, reading it over and over again. For the first time in years, she had no words, only silence, and a heart quietly breaking. The rain had returned to the village, softer now, like a lullaby rather than a storm. Elliot stood by the workshop behind his grandmother's house, sanding down an old canoe for repairs. His hands moved on instinct, but his mind was far away, still stuck somewhere between New Orleans and that office with too many lies and too much silence. He had not answered any of Lavinia's calls, hadn't read her emails, hadn't opened the package she sent the day after he left. He wanted to forget her. But he couldn't forget the way she'd looked at him, half defiance, half breaking, and the way his own heart had cracked when he walked away. Then, one late afternoon, her car appeared again. Same sleek frame, same tinted windows. But this time, she didn't step out. She left a package on his front steps, no knock, no waiting. Just left it there and drove off down the muddy path like she never wanted to force anything again. Elliot watched from the shadows, unsure whether to follow, but he didn't move. The package was a leather-bound notebook, thick, worn at the corners. Inside was her handwriting, elegant, clean, vulnerable. Page after page, Lavinia had written everything. Not just words, but her soul. The first entry was dated 3 weeks after the flood. "I don't remember everything, not the way I want to. But I remember his voice. It was steady when everything else wasn't. There were sketches, rough, childlike, of a tool shed, of Elliot's face, of the silver token she had left in his hand. There were notes about her search, trails gone cold, days she cried when no one was watching. Another entry, months later. Every boardroom felt louder after him. Every applause more hollow. Page after page, she detailed how she had built the foundation to make her survival mean something. How every village she visited, she looked for his eyes. How she had never stopped wondering if he'd ever found peace. And then, on a single page, with only one sentence in the center, she wrote, "You think I left, but I never arrived, Elliot. Not really. Not until you..." He didn't realize he was crying until the page blurred. salt, and ink mingled until the words sank into each other. For years, Elliot had carried the guilt of being left behind. He had convinced himself that maybe she never felt what he did, that maybe he was just a footnote in the story of someone destined for more. But this notebook, this wasn't a performance. This was a woman laying herself bare with no guarantee he'd ever read a word of it. He closed the book slowly and pressed it to his chest. The next morning, he went to the edge of the village, the place where the marsh met the road, where travelers either turned back or committed to the long way forward. She was sitting on a bench near the bayou, her coat pulled tight around her, watching the water move in slow spirals. Elliot approached without a word. Lavinia looked up, her breath caught, but she didn't speak first. She let him come to her. He sat beside her, the silence not awkward, but full. Finally, he said, "You didn't write those words for anyone else." "No," she said quietly. "Only you. I was angry. I deserved it." "No, you didn't deserve how quickly I left." Lavinia's eyes shimmered, but she held them open. "You left because you were scared to believe someone like me could care that much. And I let you leave because I was scared to ask you to stay." He nodded. The wind carried the smell of wet leaves and something like healing. "You once told me I mattered," she said. "But you were the one who made me believe it." Elliot turned to her. "I've spent 2 years wondering if I imagined you, wondering if that night was just survival. But it wasn't. It was the most real thing I've ever known." Then, softer, he added, "I forgive you." Her lips parted, the beginning of a sob. "Even after everything?" "Not because you're Lavinia West," he said. "Because you're the woman who almost died in my arms and still found a way to bring the world something good." She covered her face with her hands, and for a long time they sat like that, just a man and a woman who had hurt each other, healed themselves and found their way back. No crowd, no stage, just the quiet lapping of the bayou and the sound of 2 broken hearts learning how to beat in harmony again. When Elliot came back to the village, no one asked where he had been. He returned like the tide, steady, and changed. Something in him had shifted. He still fixed the same pumps, still picked up groceries for his grandmother, still helped old Mr. Conway untangle fishing nets from his shed. But the way he moved was different. Slower, more intentional. His eyes carried a softness that hadn't been there before. He didn't speak about the city, not to anyone, but people noticed that he no longer looked out over the bayou with the same kind of His shoulders were lighter, his voice less guarded. He had left angry, but he had returned with something else, something like peace. He turned the small back room of his house into a teaching space, hung up laminated posters on CPR and flood safety, collected spare boots and whistles. Every Saturday afternoon, kids from all over the area showed up to learn how to use life vests, tie rescue knots, and read river currents. He didn't advertise it. He didn't charge a cent. He just left the door open, and the children came. One rainy afternoon, he was in the middle of showing a boy how to check a pulse when he looked up and saw her. Lavinia. She was sitting on the wooden bench under the awning, rain misting her coat, her hair damp but loosely curled like it always had been. She wasn't wearing designer clothes, just jeans, a sweater, and mud-stained sneakers. She didn't wave, she didn't smile. She just waited. Elliot's hands stilled. He gave the boy a nod, told him to join the others inside. Then he walked to the bench and sat beside her. They didn't speak at first. The rain made a rhythm on the tin roof above them. The sky was low and heavy, and the smell of wet earth rose all around. After several minutes, Elliot said quietly, "I don't want to be angry anymore." Lavinia turned her head, her voice just as soft. "I don't want to be anyone else anymore." They sat with that truth between them. Not a confession, not a promise. Just a shared understanding of 2 people who had run out of ways to pretend. She didn't ask to stay. He didn't ask why she came. That night, Elliot cooked stew over the stove while she chopped carrots with quiet precision. They moved around each other like they'd done it 100 times, passing bowls, stirring silently, handing spices without needing to ask. When dinner was ready, they ate at the little table by the window. No candles, no wine, just 2 spoons and the sound of rain outside. After the meal, they washed dishes. Then they swept the porch. Elliot patched a leak in the roof, while Lavinia folded towels for the kids' class the next day. In the morning, she joined the lesson, sat cross-legged in the corner as Elliot showed the kids how to build emergency flotation with empty milk jugs and rope. One little girl, shy with tangled hair, couldn't figure out the knots. Lavinia knelt beside her, patient and kind. "Here," she said. "Loop it like this. Now pull, tight but not too tight." The girl looked up at her. "Are you a teacher too?" Lavinia smiled. "Something like that." Later, as the kids ran off with juice boxes and raincoats, Elliot handed Lavinia a thermos of hot tea. She sipped it slowly. "You don't have to stay," he said. "I know." "I'm not asking for anything." "I know that too." He looked at her, searching her face for something he couldn't name. She didn't flinch under his gaze. "You don't owe me anything, Lavinia." "I'm not here because I owe you," she replied. "I'm here because I want to be." He didn't respond, just exhaled and nodded. They did not fall into a dramatic embrace. There was no swelling music, no declarations of love. But she didn't leave, and he didn't ask her to. They just kept showing up, every day, in small ways. They taught the children, they repaired things, they laughed sometimes, and in the quiet hours, they stood side by side, planting something that had nothing to do with rain or rivers or reputations. They planted trust. And it grew, because love, they had both learned, wasn't always about falling. Sometimes it was about staying. And for the first time in their lives, both Elliot and Lavinia had stopped running. 8 months later, the Floodlight Center stood tall and proud at the edge of the village. It was not grand, no marble columns, no media frenzy, just clean white walls, sturdy shutters, and a bright blue roof that shimmered under the Louisiana sun. Inside were shelves of books, classrooms with maps and first aid kits, a small clinic stocked with real medicine, and a workshop with ropes, life vests, and rain boots hanging in neat rows. It was built with sweat and donated bricks, and more than anything, it was built with the hands and hearts of the people who had once been left behind. Elliot stood at the front steps during the opening ceremony, wearing a plain button-up shirt and boots still speckled with paint. Children sat cross-legged near the podium, some holding homemade signs. Elders in lawn chairs wiped their eyes behind dark sunglasses. Lavinia stood just behind him, her hand resting gently against his back. Elliot took a breath and stepped forward. "I've never given a speech before," he began, chuckling softly, "and I don't plan to start now." The crowd laughed. He looked out over them, faces he knew, lives he'd seen changed by water, by time, by chance. "I pulled her from a flood once," he said, nodding to Lavinia, "but she pulled me out of something worse. She saved me from drowning in my own doubts, from believing that small lives meant small dreams." He turned, smiling at her. "I never knew who she was, just knew she needed saving. And it turns out, so did I." Applause swelled around them. Lavinia stepped up next, but she didn't take the mic. She simply waved once, smiled softly, and whispered, "Thank you." It was enough. She was no longer the untouchable CEO in glossy magazines, no longer Lavinia West, just Lavinia, a woman who had found a reason to stay. That evening, after the folding chairs had been stacked and the cake was gone, Elliot and Lavinia walked down to the small wooden bridge that crossed the slow-moving river at the edge of the village, the very place where it all began. The sun was setting, painting gold across the water. Lavinia leaned on the railing, staring down at her reflection. "You know," she said, "the woman who drove into that flood, she wasn't someone I liked very much." Elliot stood beside her, quiet. "She was lost," she continued, "even before the water came." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, not gold, not silver, just a smooth band carved from bayou cedar, hand-polished until it glowed with soft amber light. On the inside, a word was etched, barely visible. Stay. This isn't a symbol of perfection, Elliot said. It's a reminder of what survives the storm. Lavinia looked at him, eyes full and bright. She didn't say anything. She just nodded and held out her hand. Elliot slipped the ring onto her finger, and then they stood there, hands entwined, leaning on the old bridge as the sky shifted from orange to indigo. Behind them, the laughter of children echoed from the center's yard, calls of "Catch me!" and "One more time!" floating through the warm air. Ahead of them, the river glimmered with light. They didn't need music. They didn't need vows. Just this moment. Two people, one love. And a bridge that didn't just connect two sides of land, but two lives, once lost, now found. Because in the end, it wasn't about the flood. It was about who stayed after the waters receded. And sometimes, love does not come with a grand entrance or a perfect plan. It arrives soaked in rain, broken in places, quiet in the way it asks, "Can I stay?" This was not a fairy tale. This was real. A woman who lost her way, a man who never asked for anything but gave everything. And a small bridge in a forgotten village where love decided to return, and this time, to stay. If this story stirred something in your soul, if it reminded you that hope can rise even after the flood, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, because here we believe the heart never forgets the ones who saved it. Subscribe now for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind you. You are never too lost to be found.